Welcome back to Slow Bells. This afternoon I am anchored in Whiteside Creek, which is just a little bit north of the Charleston area. I wanted to show you some of the video footage I shot of the Georgia portion of the trip, which is now behind me. As it turned out, the biggest challenge of the Georgia portion of the trip was getting out of the marina.
It should have been really easy to leave the slip that day. It was kind of windy, but the wind was out of the perfect direction. All I had to do was untie the dock lines and let the wind push me backwards out of my slip. So that's exactly what I did. After the dock lines were all clear, I got back on the boat and went to the upper helm, where I watched with great satisfaction as the boat gracefully backed out of her slip using the wind power. At that moment, I had no idea that an emergency had already happened and that I was just unaware of it. As luck would have it, I had a video camera rolling to record my graceful exit, and the video camera caught all the gory details of the emergency, or at least most of them. The emergency is that one of my engines had stopped running, the starboard engine. When this happens, a buzzer is supposed to go off, letting you know that the engine has died. But for the starboard engine, the buzzer only works occasionally. Most of the time, it is silent, whether the engine is running or whether it has stopped running. In this case, it was silent, so I had no clue that I was only running with one engine. As the boat was backing out, the wind eventually turned the bow of the boat a little bit to starboard, so I tried to give the starboard engine a shot of forward thrust to straighten out the boat. However, when I put the starboard engine in gear, nothing happened. Something was wrong. The previous year, on my return from Lake Champlain, I experienced a problem with similar symptoms as I was coming into Atlantic City with my friends Daryl and Debbie. In that case, the mechanical linkage on one of the shifters had come undone at the upper helm, so I only had one engine to maneuver with. The solution at that time was to just go down to the lower helm where both shifters were operating normally. That allowed me to get into Atlantic City, and I was able to correct the problem the following morning out at the anchorage. I assumed that the same thing was happening now, so I hurried down to the lower helm to drive the boat. Unfortunately, I discovered the same problem at the lower helm too. Eventually, I looked at the tachometer gauge for the starboard engine and noted that it was resting blissfully on 0. I had lost an engine on takeoff. Eventually, I returned to the upper helm and got on the VHF radio. I called the marina and told them I was heading over to their sewage pump-out dock with only one of my two engines operational. I expected the marina staff to rush to my aid, but they were trying to dock 3 other boats on a windy day and basically told me to wait my turn.
Might not be pretty, but I think I can get it in there.
I'm not at the dock right now. I've got about 3 boats that I'm docking. I'm probably going to be tied up for quite a little bit.
It's difficult to maneuver a twin-screw boat on just one engine. Every time I put the port engine in gear, the boat tried to turn to starboard towards the marsh on the right side of the channel. The technique I adopted was to take the port engine in and out of gear, which gave me just enough directional control to keep headed roughly down the channel. Fortunately, there were no boats docked at the T-head at the end of dock number 2, so I was able to make an emergency landing there myself. After I had the boat tied up, I was able to quickly confirm that the problem was fuel starvation, most likely caused by not properly tightening the lid of one of the Racor filters, which I had checked a few days before. I remained at dock number 2 overnight, roughly a tenth of a mile from my normal winter slip. At that rate, I calculated that it would take me roughly 170 years to do the Great Loop. I sincerely hoped that my daily mileage would improve over time. The next morning, things worked out much better. I was able to get the boat over to the sewage pump out dock, empty the tanks, pay my marina bill, and head off towards the ICW. But before I could reach the ICW, I had to pass through the evil jaws of the dredge monster. Here's a pop quiz for you. What's wrong with this picture? If your answer was, hey, you're off the range, you'd be right. The range is formed by these two markers here and here. In theory, if you line up these two markers when you're out boating, you'll be in the deepest part of the channel, in this area. However, over time, in this particular area, the channel has shifted. So in order to stay in the deepest water, you have to get outside of the range. I initially planned on anchoring here, but there was so much current, I decided to retreat back to this area instead. The current wasn't quite as strong over there, but there was still plenty of current to deal with, and the current and the wind had fun playing badminton with my boat all through the evening and into the next morning before I was able to make good my escape. A few days later, I passed through Hell Gate, south of Savannah. This ICW cut is infamous for shallow water, but like so many spots on the ICW, the state of the tide makes all the difference. I passed through Hell Gate an hour before high tide, and I never saw less than 8.6 feet of water depth. Most of Hell Gate was around 12 feet deep. Hey, here's another pop quiz for you. You remember that spot I passed that was 8.6 feet deep? I passed that spot an hour before high tide. So here's the quiz. If it was 8.6 feet deep at high tide and the tidal fluctuation is 7 feet, how much water would be at that spot at low tide? The answer for my boat is not enough. After passing through Hell Gate, I tried to take a shortcut near the shoreline of Little Don Island. The depths were fine initially, but they rapidly began to shoal the further north I got. I eventually had to turn around and take the normal route around the east side of Red 86. Other than that, my passage through Georgia was pleasant and, for the most part, uneventful, until I eventually left Georgia where the ICW crosses the Savannah River, just a little east of Savannah, at which point you pass into South Carolina.
Well, as you could see, there was a little bit of excitement in the Georgia portion of the trip, but overall it went well and it was fun, and I'm looking forward now to pushing my way north through South Carolina. Tune in next time for all the calamity associated with that leg of the trip. Later.